Hello and welcome back to All Routes Considered, a podcast brought to you by the A to B Global Media Online Transport News Network. I don't know if you've seen the first episode. It was good fun, wasn't it? Yeah, we had a good time. But if you're new here, which I mean, I'm going to guess at this point probably a lot of you are. We are a transport news-based podcast. We'll be coming to you at this point. It's looking at about once a month. That may increase. Time will tell. See how it all goes. But again, if you're new to the place, my name is Joey Stote. I am your host, and will be so for the foreseeable future. And I'm joined by the wonderful Tiana May, principal journalist and just excellent all-around person. Tiana, how are you?
Good, yeah. Excited to be here again, talk more transport, talk about buses a bit more last time. Our first episode focused a lot on Northern Powerhouse Rail in the UK. Today, hopefully, we'll chat about some buses as well.
Yeah, so since you mentioned that, Tiana, actually, this week, we're going to talk about the rise of Chinese buses within, well, all over the world, really.
Globally, yeah.
It's a massive topic within the industry at the moment, and we're going to have a real deep dive into it, bring you some insight, some discussion. We'll see where it takes us once again. But first, what's happening in the news? So, first up, we've got the London Overground expansion.
Yes, so for the West London orbital route, they've recently reached a funding agreement, up to £6.65 million to help progress the next stage of this project. So this project's looking to take existing freight lines and turn them into an expansion of the London Overground system. So that will improve connections in West and Northwest London, connecting Hendon and Hounslow, which is great. Obviously, London continues to be a growing city, housing developments happening further and further out, and the better connections for people, the more likely we can invest in more houses, more people, and support people who want to live there, which people do. Yeah. Well,
I mean, never a bad thing to have more public transport.
Always advocate for more public transport. Yeah,
that's what we're here for. We love a bus, we love a train, we love a tube, we love a tram.
I think people in London do love their rail networks. So these are places that are currently connected by buses.
Yeah.
And I think, by putting, an overground TfL system in, more and more people will want to use public transport in these areas.
It feels like a no-brainer.
Yeah.
The city just keeps getting bigger, which, great.
It's always a funding issue, of course. TfL would love to keep building more lines, and TfL are investing in this, and then the local boroughs and councils are also investing in this.
Excellent.
Because they want it. They want it for their people.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. No, that's excellent. So, next up, Archer Aviation, who we have, we've been aware of for many years when we've been, doing work on the site, and they have finally announced that Bristol will host their new UK engineering hub.
Yeah, which is good news for the UK, good news for the Southwest, which is where we are currently based, and ultimately will hopefully lead to, uncrewed vehicle programs in the UK. And programs like this already exist in the US, where they're looking to launch eVTOL networks in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco. And now they're looking to, do so in the UK ultimately. But in the short term, it's also really good for jobs and engineering programs, and they've identified Bristol as a positive place where they think they'll be able to recruit kind of top engineering talent in the UK, which is positive news.
Yeah, I mean, any movement towards the sort of the further, or just any integration of sort of eVTOLs, it can't be a negative thing.
No, I mean, it's zero emission transport, so that's positive. I think lots of people have questions of how eVTOLs are going to look as part of public transport or mass transport networks, obviously. But even if all they do is replace helicopters for the top tier people, I mean, that's still good. Helicopters emit a lot of pollution. If we're replacing helicopters with electric vehicles, that is a positive. But I think companies like Archer would like to do more than just replace helicopters. They want to kind of build them into transport networks. And, well, it's yet to see how that'll happen. But, engineering hubs and getting this technology over here is a good start.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And finally, Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, which is a fabulous name. It sounds like a young bear. They've opened a pre-clearance facility, haven't they?
They have, for people flying to the US. So a pre-clearance facility means that passengers can clear immigration and border control before they get on their plane. So they can do that at their airport in Canada, and then when they arrive in the US, they can just, exit like a domestic passenger. And obviously that's quite convenient for passengers. The US border control can take a while and stuff when you get there, so it's nice to be able to do it domestically instead. And it also allows authorities in both countries to address security risks earlier in the journey. You know, you could stop someone getting on the plane if they're not allowed in the US, rather than flying them all the way over to the US, then realising they're not allowed in. But only a handful of airports globally do offer this at the moment. Most of them are in Canada, which kind of makes sense, neighbouring countries. In Europe, it's just Dublin and Shannon, both of which are in Ireland. It's not something I've used yet. I would love to. We're based down in Exeter. You can fly Exeter to Dublin and then onto the US with Aer Lingus. And I'd quite like to do that purely for the benefit of seeing what pre-clearance is like firsthand.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's got to take out a huge amount of guff.
Yeah, and just like that feeling of then landing and being like, oh wow, I'm actually here, rather than landing and then thinking, oh, I wonder if I'll be able to get my Uber in 30 minutes time or 2 hours time, or my train, which I'd prefer to do, not an Uber.
Yeah.
My train or my bus, but that isn't always possible in the US.
Yeah, of course. Of course. No, it seems like an extremely positive thing. It's the kind of thing that I'm sort of surprised we haven't introduced further. You know, there's not more of it. Like, yeah,
I don't know whether it's harder, like somewhere like Heathrow. Maybe because it's such the scale of it would be harder to introduce than say somewhere like Dublin.
Yeah.
Which obviously still a big airport, but not quite to the scale of Heathrow.
Yeah, of course.
I don't know the ins and outs of why it's not more widely introduced, or like anywhere in like mainland Europe you can't do it from.
Yeah, that's surprising.
You kind of expect it from like a Amsterdam or a Frankfurt or something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But you can't. No, it's mostly Canada. A couple of places in the Middle East, I think.
Okay.
And the Caribbean, maybe like Barbados, a few places like that.
Well, no, that's excellent news. That would be great.
Yeah.
That'd be really useful, I'm sure. With that, we come to the main topic of discussion this week, which is, the rise of Chinese buses across the world. Over the course of the last 15 years, the landscape of the international bus market has, you could definitely say it's undergone quite a significant transformation. In 2011, pretty much all the most prominent names on the scene, Iveco, MAN, Daimler, Volvo, nearly all manufacturing was kept within
for European buses. For
the wider region.
Yeah.
But now, we come to 2026, and a third of Europe's bus fleets are made up of Chinese-made electric vehicles, and that's obviously a huge change when compared to before.
There wasn't really a need to ship buses over from China. It just wouldn't really make sense when Europe had domestic manufacturing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, 68% of buses in Copenhagen, they're manufactured in China, and by 2027, that's expected to rise to 80%.
Gosh.
So, huge numbers. It can't really be overstated just how much of a prominent role they play now. So, I mean, with that said, it would seem that a lot of countries are choosing to invest in the buses. But it's not quite so simple in some places. I mean, even in Denmark, their Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, has warned against the reliance on them. And there's been a rise in concern regarding the vehicles and the technology within them recently. But I mean, again, we'll get onto that. But just to start us off, I mean, it's probably best to just ask quite plainly, why are so many electric buses in Europe coming from China?
Well, I think to start off with, China electrified a lot earlier. So they've been producing electric buses for longer, which gives OEMs a decade really of cost and technology benefit being ahead before Europe. Electrification also in Europe brought out lots of new players. So I think even then these big OEMs that you mentioned, like your Daimler and your Volvo, who once upon a time were kind of making all the buses, all of a sudden there was so much competition. And I went to Busworld in 2023, and those big players who were kind of selling 45% of combustion engine buses, even then were producing less than 1% of the zero emission buses. So it's kind of really created this shift where all of a sudden this new technology came along, and it was no longer what they'd been doing this whole time. So these big players, all of a sudden, if they wanted to keep up, they had to change. And new players came in who had the technology before them. And a lot of that did come from China. Obviously the raw materials and stuff of making batteries, a lot of that comes from China too. So I think that's one of the reasons why it potentially happened earlier over there.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it's extremely important because in the European Union's been setting all these massively ambitious targets to ban carbon dioxide emitting buses. So your BYDs, CATL, Yutong, they're all doubling down on shipments to Europe, and like you said, to relieve domestic production of capacity in China. Yeah,
and in some way, that's needed because it fills this market demand that European manufacturers can't necessarily meet or traditionally haven't been able to meet to produce the volumes of vehicles needed within the required timeframe. So if the European Union is telling these cities, hey, you've got to electrify, and these cities have hundreds of buses, the European factories aren't necessarily ready to make the buses in time, and yet the Chinese manufacturers are. So they have greater production cap. But then as a result of that, you see these European manufacturers that are suffering. People like Van Hool and Volvo. I mean, Volvo's stopped producing complete buses in Europe now.
Yeah,
and it used, we're saying it used to be one of the biggest players, and now it's no longer making full buses in Europe.
Chassis, Volvo,
yeah,
isn't it?
yeah, and then it ships out bodywork and stuff from places like Egypt. So it has like partners that it works with, but it's no longer doing the whole production. And obviously, with factories like that closing down, like they closed their factory in Poland, that's people's jobs who are being lost, and staff being made redundant. So it is having an impact for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, we've obviously touched on this, very briefly, but what about like security or ethical concerns with the overall shift? I mean, so far it's only really one local authority in Sweden has made the decision to halt purchases of Chinese buses, but that was down to human rights concerns. They were found in a 2023 report, and I mean that found evidence of forced labour practices in the production of Chinese buses, and those were found in major companies like BYD, CATL, and Yutong.
Yeah, which is concerning, obviously. And I'm surprised more countries haven't potentially looked into that. If Sweden are saying, hey, there's this human rights violation, but maybe it comes down to kind of they need the buses. It's not necessarily within their interest to look into it and ban the purchase of Chinese buses. I know more recently, Ruter, who operates in Oslo in Norway, did a cybersecurity test where they tested a VDL bus and a Yutong bus, and they found concerns in the Yutong bus that were not present in the VDL bus, where in theory the manufacturer had the ability to disable the bus remotely. It's called like a kill switch is what they're being referred to as. And this has kind of led to an increased conversation globally about cybersecurity threats from China. So, it's not something Yutong are actively doing where they're, cutting, like switching off all the buses. But there's this like potential of, okay, what if from like a geopolitical point of view, do we want a company in China to be able to suddenly shut down or take control of the buses? And I know lots of manufacturers and stuff have released responses to that study. And I mean, you had places like TfL being like, oh, we don't actually have any of those buses, so don't worry in London, almost as if they were justifying the fact that, oh, maybe you should be a bit concerned about this. But I'd say in general, these buses they're good quality buses. It's not like we can buy cheaper in China, but the quality isn't as good. I'd say overall, these buses, they perform well. We went to the Busworld Awards recently together. Yeah, and Yutong won a lot of awards.
Almost every single thing,
Busworld Europe 2025. They were winning the awards. And part of that, again, is because, like we were saying, they've been around longer, they've been tested, and operators as a result, could trust them more. I was in Torquay yesterday speaking with Stagecoach. They were launching an all-electric fleet. And some of those buses came from Alexander Dennis, and some of them came from Yutong. And the manager of Stagecoach Southwest was saying that actually, as a company, they trust the Yutong buses because they've had them in their network, they've seen them for longer, whereas the Alexander Dennis buses are newer to the scene, and therefore they just have less data on them. So that almost gives these Chinese buses upper hand, that they've been around longer. So they are trusted. So you do have these concerns, like human rights, cybersecurity and things like that. But in terms of how the buses are actually operating, I don't think there are major concerns that they're all terrible quality or anything like that.
Well, they're just strong products, I guess.
I think they are.
At this point, it's, we're long past the days of, distrust of these products that aren't made locally, and I guess it's just an onward march of time, which is a good thing. We want good quality buses. So in a way, it could be positive. Like the good quality buses that are coming from China almost force manufacturers in Europe to step up and also produce, of course,
good quality buses.
So I mean, obviously we've talked about Europe and how it's all sort of like it's increasing throughout Europe, the UK. How does that compare to the USA currently?
Yeah, so the USA isn't seeing the same shift. Other parts of the world potentially are. Places like Africa and stuff like that, Chinese manufacturers are investing in. But the US has implemented Buy American requirements that kind of prevent this, well, not kind of, they do, they prevent this from happening, where they mandate that if federal funding is being used to buy buses, which it often is, as it is here, where the government gives out grants to transit agencies to buy new vehicles, they say, hey, if you're using our government funding, the buses need to be made here, and the products that are being put into the buses, at least 70% of the cost of all components needs to be produced in the US, and final assembly has to occur here. So the US isn't experiencing this same shift as a result, and they are still electrifying their fleets, not at the same pace as Europe, but they are managing to electrify their fleets with manufacturers who are based in the US.
Am I correct in thinking they're actually banning Chinese vehicles in the US market by, what was it, 2027?
I think so. I think that's the current. Trump changes his mind a lot on things.
Of course. Of course. Okay, well, I mean, time, as I do love to say, time will tell on that one, I suppose. And I mean, I said earlier that we touched on it. We haven't actually touched on it all that much, but I mean, what about the UK? Like, Yeah,
so unlike the US, the UK is bound by trade mandates, a bit like Europe is, that don't let us say, okay, we're giving you government money, therefore it has to be spent on British buses or British components. I would say, however, that manufacturers in the UK are ready to produce buses. They have active supply lines that are, up and running, ready to produce buses, and are producing buses. So Wrightbus has expanded its workforce from 49 people to over 2,000 people now since 2019, and it's manufacturing 1,200 buses a day. So we can produce buses here at a decent rate, and manufacturers like Wrightbus and like Alexander Dennis, they do acknowledge the competition from overseas, and they want to rise and meet it, and they are producing better buses every day. The Generation 2 Electroliner has been recognised as the world's most efficient electric bus. So they're very much acknowledging the competition from China, and they're saying, hey, we can meet this and we can do better, which is great. But despite this, UK bus manufacturing in general is under threat. So Switch Mobility has gone under, which does kind of leave us with Wrightbus and Alexander Dennis as our big players. But last year, Alexander Dennis required emergency help from the Scottish government. So it's struggling in that sense. And just generally, there's this growing paradox where the demand for zero-emission buses is going up, but the amount we're producing here is going down. So in 2025, 694 more zero-emission buses were registered in Britain, which is a 38% increase compared to the previous year. But there was 167 fewer buses built in the UK. So we had this increase in the number of buses that were going on British roads, and then a decrease in the number being built. So I think we've got this manufacturing capability, and we just, we could do with building them over here. So I think the US system does have strong benefits in this case, because otherwise governments risk simply sending the government funding they're using to buy buses overseas. We're just kind of giving money away, and then we're faced with having to, buy Alexander Dennis out of administration when the public money could have just been spent on their buses instead, supported local jobs and supported local supply chains, which, is something that the government should want to do.
So, I mean, with that in mind, what should governments be doing to aid domestic manufacturing at this point?
So I watched a really interesting debate in Parliament last month, or in January maybe. It was led by Ewan Steinbank, who's the MP for Falkirk, which is where Alexander Dennis is based. And he led this debate that really advocated for investing in British bus manufacturers. And it stressed this need to place a higher emphasis on the social value weighting in procurement processes, which is historically accounted for as little as 5%. I think mayoral combined authorities have said they'll increase it to 10%, but this debate was kind of advocating to increase it for 30%, which is a potential kind of meaningful intervention that could shift the outcome of tendering and procurement in favour of British manufacturers, because it recognises like the impact it has on local jobs and local supply chains and training and apprenticeships and things like that kind of give social benefit. And if that was taken into account more in the procurement, then I think more British companies would win the tender.
Yeah.
So it's the same as in Europe. We can't legally mandate you have to buy domestic, but there are things we can do like that kind of indirect policy tools that weight things in domestic favour. And Europe could do the same with things like, okay, we're going to put a higher emphasis on cybersecurity or a higher emphasis on environmental standards. And also, governments could invest more in like R&D subsidies and factory decarbonisation and skills and production scale up that would then allow European bus manufacturers to produce more buses.
Yeah.
That is kind of direct ways that the government could support domestic manufacturing and enable European manufacturers to meet the demand that is at the moment having to be met by Chinese suppliers. I think if domestic manufacturers can deliver, it would be positive, right? Let's support jobs, let's support people, let's support supply chains. It does just come down to whether the European manufacturers can do so. The EU is setting really high targets and prioritising the climate and saying, okay, we want you to decarbonise fleets as soon as possible. And, this kind of foreign import is helping to do that. And open procurement is enabling that, which is obviously great for the environment. But I would also note that if we can manufacture buses domestically, that's greater good for the environment because we're not having to ship them all the way from China, which has a negative impact on the environment, surely. So domestic manufacturing, if we can make it happen, would further aid decarbonisation goals.
Yeah, of course.
Ultimately, I do think it is unfair to criticise procuring overseas if there is no viable domestic option that can meet demand. I know you wrote a story recently about BC Ferries. They were buying, new ferries to operate in British Columbia, and they were getting a lot of stick for buying them from China, but there was no Canadian supplier. There wasn't a Canadian person who bidded for it and wanted to supply the ferries, and ultimately they need these ferries. The people who live in the, that British Columbia, Greater Vancouver area really rely on these ferries to get around. They needed ferries. A Chinese supplier could provide them, and a Canadian supplier couldn't. So, if the goal is to produce green transport,
doesn't matter where they're built.
Potentially not. No.
There should be ways in which to achieve this goal. Whilst supporting domestic manufacturers. As you say, supply chains, jobs.
I think that's what I would like to see.
Yeah.
I would like to see the percentage of buses coming from China go down because, businesses and supply chains and manufacturing is flourishing in one's own countries, wherever that be.
There's things that can be done, really, aren't there, to bring it sort of closer to home in a way that benefits everyone.
Yes. And I think especially when it comes to public money and public funding, then the government should be trying to spend their money within their own country. Yeah. I think. But do let us know what you think. Yeah. We understand it's a slightly controversial topic. Yeah. People have different thoughts, opinions, angles. Do let us know. Yeah. Yeah, please do. I mean, it's such a massive topic, and I think that there's so much nuance to it, and there's so much and we'd really love to hear what you think. So yeah, like Tiana says, please let us know. And I mean that pretty much brings us. We've pretty much run out of time now, but I mean that was the second episode of All Routes Considered, and we really hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much if you watched the first one. If you didn't, then this is your first time with us. Again, welcome. We'll be back with you soon. We're still sort of figuring this stuff out, but we're so happy that you're along for the ride. We're having a great time putting these together. Things can only go up from here. They can only get better, and it's a good time. And again, thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. You can find the show on iTunes. No, you can't. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts. You can find it on Spotify. We're on Podbean, YouTube, anywhere you get podcasts, we're there. So tell your friends, tell your colleagues, tell your enemies, especially if they really love transport. All transport nerds. Yeah. We want to see and hear from fellow transport nerds. Yeah, please. Yeah. Please. More of them. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.